Hello Year 10. This week's lesson is about how sex is determined in the genetic context. Okay, so what you want you to do first of all is to think about the families you know and what genders their children are. Okay, so whether they have a lot of boys or girls, same number or different numbers, and why might that be? So let's have a think about that for a moment, please. Next, I want you to think about the difference between sex and gender, what those words actually mean. You may have your own thoughts on this, but actually the World Health Organization has definitions for them. So they describe sex as being that which is biologically defined, i.e. what you are born with in terms of organs, and gender really is a social construction, and we know that we have male and female genders now, but we also have people who define themselves in other ways. Okay, so today's lesson is coming towards the end of our stream of lessons in this unit. We're not quite there yet. There is another two actually after this one, and today we're just going to look at how inheritance works in terms of Punnett squares and features that are inherited, but primarily about sex determination. Okay, so we need to identify how many chromosomes a human body cell has. We have talked about that a bit before already. Explain how different characteristics are determined and have a look at some family trees, and also construct a genetic cross diagram to make predictions. So again, when the exam board asks you to make genetic cross diagrams, you make a Punnett square. It's the same thing and you are less likely to go wrong. Okay, so we're going to do a match up again like we quite often do at the start of these lessons, and hopefully you are quite familiar with these words now and should be having them branded into your brain so that you can recall them in the exam. So I'll just give you a moment to have a go at that. Pause the slides. And we'll review what you wrote. So the first one, gamete, that's the sex cells. Okay, so the egg and the sperm cells, and that applies to plants as well as to animals. They're still called the gametes. Chromosomes are that massive long strand of DNA that you inherit from your parents, and on that long strand of DNA, a few of you got this wrong last time, in my group at least, on the homeworks, in that you thought that the genes were bigger than the chromosomes. Okay, the chromosome is the whole thing and it will contain thousands of genes. The gene itself is a hereditary unit that carries the characteristics of a short section of DNA. And an allele might be the variation in that gene. Last time we've talked specifically about eye colour, so whether or not you have the allele for blue or for brown eyes, for instance. Okay, so that's the variation, blue and brown. Okay, so thinking about how we inherit characteristics then. We talked in previous lessons about how we inherit the DNA from our parents through the chromosomes, and that the chromosomes contain the genes. Now, the genes we've just said have different forms and they are the alleles. The important thing to remember is that the alleles, and they might be different from each parent, is that those will code for a particular protein. Okay, and depending on which allele you inherit, that will determine which characteristic you had. Again, using the example of eye colour, if you inherit one allele for blue eyes and one allele for brown eyes, you will have brown eyes, okay? But you've got two different variants of that gene. It's both the gene for eye colour, but the alleles are different variants, okay? So that gives us a little bit more variety in our population for all the different characteristics you see in a person that make one person look different to another or have different medical conditions to another. Now, we've said that some genes or alleles are dominant over other alleles or genes. Okay, so they are going to be expressed even if you only inherit one copy. So for instance, again using eye colour, if you inherit one copy of the gene for brown eyes, you are going to have brown eyes. Doesn't matter what the other one is, you are always going to have brown eyes. Okay, if you have inherited a recessive allele or gene from the other parent, for instance the blue-eyed gene, you will only have blue eyes if you have also inherited that from the first parent. Okay, so if you inherit blue-eyed alleles from both of your parents, you will have blue eyes because that gene is recessive. Okay, it goes into the background if you like. It's less dominant than the dominant gene, which would be the brown one. Okay, so if you inherit a brown, brown eyes. If you inherit two blues, blue eyes. If you inherit one blue, still brown eyes. It is a little bit more complicated than that because obviously some people have colours in between, like green eyes. You don't need to worry about that at this stage. That really is for A-level / degree level biology and inheritance work. Okay, so what we want to focus on today is about gender specifically. So let's have a look at that now. Right, we already know that ordinary body cells, and that could be cells in your liver, it could be your white blood cells, it could be cells in your brain, okay, but not your red blood cells. They're the ones that don't contain any chromosomes. Okay, in all of those cells you are going to have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay, 22 of those pairs control all the things about you, like your health and the way you look, your height, etc., whether you have long fingers, short fingers, all of that stuff. Okay, and the 23rd pair will decide whether or not you are a male or a female in terms of your sex. Okay, in females you have 2 X chromosomes. Okay, so the sex chromosome number 23 is going to be an X from each of your parents. You are XX, therefore you are a girl. Okay, if you inherit the Y chromosome from your father, and you can only inherit it from your father because, as we've just said, women will carry XX, then you will have XY and you will be a male. Okay, so in order to work out genetic crosses for male and female, we are going to use Punnett squares. So let's have a look at this next one. So we're going to make a Punnett square now to determine the sex of the children of a couple that are XX and XY genotypes, the female being XX and the male being XY. So pause the slides and just have a quick go at that. Shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes. Okay, hopefully you have a Punnett square with XX across the top and XY down the side, and you've filled in the 4 boxes that would be the potential offspring of that couple. Okay, so your boxes hopefully show that 2 of the offspring will be XX, so female, and 2 of the offspring will be XY, so male. Okay, and the ratio of each of the genotypes therefore is 2 to 2 or 1 to 1, or you could say 50% of a chance to have a boy or of a girl. Now, thinking back to the question I asked you at the beginning about the families, you know, maybe your own family, you probably don't have 2 boys and 2 girls in your family, okay, or your siblings don't make up 2 boys and 2 girls. Now, I'm one of 3 in my family and we're all girls, okay, so what you have to remember is that every time that child is conceived, you have a new chance, 50-50, of making a boy or a girl baby. Okay, so you have to remember that every time those genes are crossed, you have a different outcome available to you. Okay, but every time it's going to be 50-50. They quite like in the exam to ask you something about disease genetics and then ask you what the chance would be of having a girl, for instance, with cystic fibrosis. So whatever your chance was, let's say it was, I don't know, 60% chance of having cystic fibrosis. If they ask you about the chance of a female having cystic fibrosis, it's going to be 30% chance. I'll just use a really random example there that probably doesn't work, but don't worry about that. Now, for this Punnett square, I'm just going to put the answers at the end of the presentation so that you can check what you put down on your paper. So let's have a look at some actual chromosomes and whether they would result in a boy or a girl being born. So here we have some chromosomes from a mother. So the gamete is the egg cell here, and you can see the sex chromosome at the bottom is highlighted in blue. And here is the father with the sex chromosome at the bottom highlighted in blue again. So if we put those 2 sets of chromosomes together. Now we have paired chromosomes, and you can see at the bottom we've got a little blue rectangle there again, which determines the sex of the child. And in fact this one is a son. Now you might think that's a little bit dodgy looking, okay, because that XY does look a little bit like an XX. I promise you in your exam they would be much clearer on what that 23rd chromosome would look like. So for a daughter, I've just put in pink at the bottom there, an XX combination. Sometimes you might see the chromosomes represented like this, okay, and you can see on these that we even have the individual genes identified there, the little stripes down the chromosomes. But if we look at the Y chromosome here, you can still see it is slightly an X shape, but it is much, much smaller than the X chromosome, which has a lot more genetic information on it than does the Y. And this is quite often why genetic conditions are more likely to occur in males, because they don't have parts of that genetic information from the mother on the second chromosome. Now here we have an image of a family tree, and a lot of people have been very interested in family trees, genealogy, I think that's the right way to say it. Certainly friends of mine during lockdown have been on ancestry.com and have been looking up information about their family trees. Okay, and they can be quite useful to look at who has produced children with whom or who's been married to whom. Okay, but they can also be used for us to look at particular genetic conditions, so they can be used in biology to good effect. Now we'll have a look at a family tree. So normally you would see a family tree with just the names of all the individuals on it. This one just has one name at the end here. Okay, and this is how it might be presented to you in an exam. But for our purposes, we're also adding some biology, because in the legend here we've got some information about the sex of the individuals and also about their eye colour. Okay, so you can see that a male is a square, a female is a circle, and if either of those have blue eyes, that square or that circle has been filled in. Now we've got two couples. This couple, the female has brown eyes and the male has blue eyes. This couple, the female has blue eyes and the male has brown eyes. Immediately we can see that some of the children of those two couples have got blue eyes. Now what that tells us is that these individuals, okay, so this mother and this father, although they don't have blue eyes, they must be carrying that recessive blue-eyed gene, otherwise they couldn't possibly produce blue-eyed children, because in order to have blue eyes we know that you need to inherit the blue-eyed gene from both of your parents, because blue eyes are a recessive trait. Okay, so if we look past the first generation and into the second generation, okay, we can see that these individuals had some children together, 5 children, and let's call them John and Elaine. Okay, and John and Elaine have had 5 children, and you can see that despite the fact that they both don't have blue eyes, they have got children that do have blue eyes. Okay, and the reason that has happened is because Tom and Jane have both inherited a blue-eyed gene from each of their parents. Okay, so these two, if you like, were carriers of that blue-eyed gene, and that blue-eyed gene has been passed to both of those children. Okay, now the other 3 remaining children may or may not have a blue-eyed recessive gene. There is no reason to say that they have or they haven't. We don't know, okay, unless we test them or unless they go on to produce 3rd generation, and we can find out from that. So what we need to think about in terms of family trees is what can be inherited, whether it's dominant or recessive, and what that might give you in the next generation. Okay, now like I said, they might show you a family tree like this in the exam, but if they ask you to draw a genetic diagram, don't draw one of these. It's so easy to go wrong. Okay, so you need to draw a Punnett square based on the information that you're given. Hopefully you'll have a go at drawing your own family tree, and maybe you can put eye colour into that also. If not, don't worry about it. If you can't remember what colour eyes everybody has, hopefully they're in your house with you at the moment anyway, so you should be able to have a look. And the next thing that you are going to need to do is some exam questions, okay, that your teachers will set you. They may set you something else to do. Okay, bear in mind when you're doing your questions things that you needed to be able to remember, and that was about the number of chromosomes in the human body cell, explaining different characteristics, so how they're inherited in terms of family trees and Punnett squares, and also to be able to make predictions from Punnett squares. So that's the bit where we said about the ratios or the percentages. So what is the chance of having a child with blue eyes, for instance? Okay, if you want to try and write your own mark scheme for the questions after they've been sent to you, that would be a really good idea. Here now we have the example that we were looking at earlier for the cross to give you the male and the female children of a couple. Okay, so we've got genotype XX female, genotype XY male, and you put them into a Punnett square like this, and you can see that I've filled in all possible outcomes for those crosses of that man and that woman. As I said before, it doesn't matter whether you have the man or the woman up along the top or down the side. Okay, the exam board might ask you to identify the particular characteristics. So if I said now they wanted you to identify the males, then a good idea is to put a circle around it, and that would get you the mark in the exam. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed the lesson. It's quite interesting learning about your own genetics. Have a go at the tasks that your teacher has set you, please.